A great float. The ninja comes tonight. Sleep deprivation. Misplaced priorities. The plan. The effects of rock salt when shot from a 12-gauge shotgun upon a piece of cardboard. A feeble enemy. Ninja versus Grandpa. A ridiculous rationalization. Our float looks great, said Adam Keene loudly across the locker room. Doesn't it? Yeah, said Popeye. It does. It looks really great. I agree, said Hyder. It's great. I was sure one of the seniors was soon to sniff out our plot. It was hard to listen to my fellow bluebirds prattle on. They were the worst actors I'd ever seen. I'm glad we worked so hard on it, said Leonardo. It looks very good now. I think you mean great, said Popeye nervously. Great had been the adjective we'd agreed upon. I was cringing. It turned out, however, that I had nothing to fear. The seniors were far too interested in the thrill of destroying another of our floats, and they were far too dismissive of Leonardo's potent drive for revenge. And, of course, they didn't have a clue about Grandpa Lamberth. While a handful of freshmen had reconstructed our float to make it a passable entry into the homecoming parade, the rest of us, nearly 50 in number, had taken orders from Grandpa Lamberth until late into the night. We turned his farm into an absolute booby trap. The seniors were going to die, unless such awful acting caused one of them to smell a rat. It doesn't look that good, I said, hoping to balance things out a little. I looked at Swart, the most likely candidate to catch on that something was amiss. I smiled and shrugged my shoulders. They're just talking it up. Swart stared at me then. I was suddenly certain that I'd screwed up, that it was me that somehow subconsciously sounded the alarm. How good does it look, then? Asked Swart, suspiciously, I thought. Not as good as yours? I said meekly. His eyes bored into me. You haven't seen ours. Nobody but the seniors have been within a quarter mile of our float. Well, I said, I'm sure it's not as good as yours. I believe Chad Yost's monomaniacal focus upon causing pain and misery to those lower on the social scale than himself saved me then. It's going down, Yost cried gleefully as he came out of the bathroom, still pulling up his shorts. You little freshman worms got me? The ninja comes tonight. He was so excited, his grin so big, that his face looked like it was going to split in half. You should have just stuck with our plan and said it looked great, said Hyder during our run. Shut up, I said. I didn't like being chastised by my brother. We were doing a 5-mile tempo run that day. We were running along a paved trail that ran beside the river. Coach had marked all the miles with a can of spray paint. The plan was to run 3 miles at 6-minute pace, hit the 4th in 5:30, be under 5:15 for the last. But not all out, said Coach. Nobody's under 5 on the last one. No racing, got it? We're saving the racing for Saturday. Saturday was our conference meet. It was a big one and was only 2 days away. It was our last race before sectionals. It seemed to me as we jogged to the river trail that we'd spent most of our week thinking about things other than running. We'd been up late every night, too. I'd fallen asleep in math class that day, something I never did. Forget sleep deprivation, though. The night before us promised greater damage to our team than a lack of sleep ever would. Our varsity 7 had solidified. Chambers had been coming on, but he had developed a stress fracture. So our varsity now consisted of 3 freshmen, me, Hyder, and Keene, 3 seniors, Slade, Swart, and Yost, and a junior firmly aligned with the seniors, Victor. It seemed to me a bad idea for almost half our varsity to be shooting the other half of our varsity, minus Victor, with a shotgun loaded with rock salt less than a week before sectionals. But hey, that was just me. The problem was I didn't see a way out. They'll be here, Leonardo said to Grandpa in an attempt to ease his nerves as we sat in the darkness outside the barn. They wouldn't miss a chance to ruin our float for the world. Grandpa held the gun. We decided he would be the one to shoot Yost. It'd be a bad idea for you to shoot him, he'd said earlier. I'll do it. We didn't protest. It was nearly 10 o'clock. The float was done. It wasn't much. Green tissue paper made up a football field. White tissue paper made up the yard lines and end zones. 2 yellow field goals stood at each end. In orange and pine green across the side of the float were the words, "The snappers are great." My suggestion to add Tony the Tiger's grrr had been ignored. It was complete, or it would be, when Becca dressed up like a tiger and pranced around on it with a football under her arm and a helmet on her head during the drag through town. Now we were just waiting for the seniors to come to try to destroy it. The plan was to lure the ninja and the egg throwers in, then pull up a net Grandpa had rigged to 2 tractors behind them. In the darkness, they wouldn't be able to see the netting. When they got stuck in it, all us freshmen still there, willing and able, were to give them a taste of their own medicine. Grandpa had purchased the eggs himself. He'd provided the net as well. Gung-ho is an adjective I rarely use, but it applied to Grandpa Lamberth. "I'll just shoot the ninja," Grandpa repeated quietly to himself over the course of the evening. I couldn't tell if he wanted to blast away at all of them. We'd soon see if he was able to maintain his self-control. To be sure we didn't accidentally murder Chad Yost, we'd done some tests that evening with the 12-gauge. Grandpa had been packing rock salt loads all afternoon, emptying out shells of their shot and filling them with Morton's ice cream salt. "They're light, real light," he'd said, worriedly, before he tested them. "I don't know if they'll even work." We tacked a piece of cardboard onto a tree behind his barn and set to find out. "Let's see what happens from here," he said. Leonardo, Hyder, Keene, Popeye, and I all covered our ears. He raised the gun and pulled the trigger from about 20 meters away. The shotgun blasted. Blue smoke filled the air. The cardboard looked untouched. "Dang," said Grandpa. There was no recoil. This, apparently, was bad news. We walked up to discover that our eyes hadn't deceived us. There was barely a mark on the cardboard. "Let's get closer. See how close I'm going to have to be to make it burn." It turned out he was going to have to be close, like within 10 feet. "That's just fine," said Grandpa contentedly. "That way, they'll think I'm going to kill them." He smiled a smile that was just this side of sane. I was glad for many reasons that I wasn't Chad Yost. The moon was yellow and full that night. A light breeze blew in from the west, causing the acres of corn surrounding the barn to shimmer and roll in the moonlight like the surface of a vast dark green lake. 10 brave freshmen had agreed to serve as bait, pretending to pomp and hammer on our completed float in order to lure the seniors in. By midnight, we were sure they'd decided once was enough, that they would allow our float to live. The disappointment was tangible on Grandpa's face, although he was saying it was probably for the best that they hadn't attacked. He'd been mighty riled up. He wasn't sure what he'd have done to them boys if they showed their faces again. It was then that we heard the siren. The siren was surprisingly loud, and although we were expecting an attack of some kind, it still sent shivers down my spine. I felt perhaps a tiny bit what soldiers must feel when the moment of truth arrives. "Freshmen," said a crackly, amplified voice, "you have proven yourselves a feeble enemy. You are worthless and weak. We must teach you. We do this for your own good." The voice echoed through the barn and out over the misty fields. "Move away from the float. We don't want to hurt you physically. Emotionally and psychologically, we intend to crush you." "Here we go, boys," said Grandpa as the amplified voice echoed over us. He gripped the shotgun tightly to his chest. The roar of the chainsaw moved my heart into my throat. A flurry of eggs spattered on the empty barnyard floor. Chad Yost in his ninja suit stormed past us, totally unaware that we were hiding in the tall grass. I could see the outlines of other seniors in the darkness, standing and throwing eggs. Grandpa stood and placed the whistle hanging around his neck between his teeth. He breathed in deep and let loose a long, high shriek. It was our signal. Becca Lamberth and another farm kid fired up the tractors, their bright floodlights coming on and blasting the seniors caught in front of them. They backed the tractors up quickly. The net rose between the 2 tractors and was nearly invisible in the darkness. All of us hidden in the high grass, nearly 30 of us, rose and began throwing Grandpa's eggs from the buckets full of them he'd provided. The seniors caught in the middle of our crossfire began to scream. I saw one drop to the ground, holding his head. "Why aren't the eggs breaking?" shouted Leonardo, a triumphant grin on his face. "I kept 'em in the freezer. They hurt more that way, said Grandpa, just before he made his way between the ninja and his path of escape. Yost had noticed what was happening behind him. In the euphoria of destruction, he had been both deaf and blind to our doings. I'm sure the roar of the chainsaw distracted him as well. When he turned around to find Grandpa standing in the empty barnyard within talking distance, the shotgun pointing right at his chest, he immediately dropped his instrument of destruction. It landed with a thud and died almost instantly. He froze. Some said after the fact that Yost actually pooped his pants when he saw that old man with a shotgun before him. Some say he only peed them. Whatever the truth, I can say with certainty that Chad Yost did one or the other, or both. He was that scared. His hands raised, Yost shuffled to the side, trying to edge his way around Grandpa without setting him off. Grandpa was muttering things we couldn't hear, but I'm certain I wouldn't have wanted his words directed at me. By this time, most of the seniors had worked their way free of the net and had escaped, scrambling on their hands and knees in terror, back to their cars parked along the road in front of the farm. The only sound was the sound of tires squealing to get away. The egg throwing had stopped. Now it was just Grandpa and Yost center stage. I hope he doesn't shoot him, I said quietly as I peered through the dry grass. Not from too close, said Hyder. I hope he blasts his balls off, said Leonardo. Popeye and Keen just stared. Grandpa let Yost get all the way around him, etching out a semicircle like he was trying to walk away from a grizzly he'd bumped into on a hike. Then, as soon as Yost turned to run, the shotgun blasted. Yost jumped, covering his behind with his hands, and then continued his sprint. He slammed into the net, pulling it free from one of the tractors. He tripped, rolled, and then seemed to regain his feet almost instantly. He disappeared into the darkness, yelping. The float's ruined, said Grandpa as we sat on the flatbed, eating starchy popcorn, our adrenaline still working its way through our veins. It was nearly 1 a.m. That's okay, said Leonardo. It was worth it. Grandpa chuckled and threw his arm around his 14-year-old soulmate.